Thank you, Allison. And thank you for joining us this morning. My objective in the conversation today is to have you walk away with some ideas. If you happen to be in that group in the industry that is struggling to figure out, where do I start? There's so many places to start in this topic of Pharma 4.0 and the quality component of it. And as you'll see, we ran a survey that gave us some interesting results. If you're in that large majority of the group that's struggling to figure out where to start, my ideal outcome today is, as you walk away with a couple of ideas on where you can start. All right? So we're going to talk about the case for accelerating the implementation. We're not going to talk about the theory. We're not going to talk about, what does Pharma 4.0 mean. We're just going to talk about how do we accelerate the pace of implementation progress. We're going to talk about the business case. I'll share some of the results of the research that we've done around roadblocks and keys to success. And we're going to then talk about a couple of ideas on where to start. And we're going to do that by reviewing some case studies that will touch on that particular topic of where can I start leveraging all this information, all this data that I have in my quality system, and begin to do something meaningful with that data. Then we're going to talk about this concept of continuous QMS health monitoring, which is where we're going next with our thinking and with our activities. So a little bit about OQSIE, just 30-second to give you a framework of who we are, what we do. So we're a management and technical consulting company focused in life sciences, and within life sciences we focus in manufacturing, quality system, supply chain related topics. So we do a little bit of consulting, and over the last 3 years we've begun to develop what we call technology solutions, and we'll talk a little bit about some of the examples and case studies are some of that evolution. So that's how we help clients in the industry. So let me set the stage with just leveraging the ISP Pharma 4.0 operating model picture. This was developed in 2017. Comes from the Industry 4.0, which was initially deployed and communicated in 2011. When I look at this model, having run plants and networks of plants in my prior life, there's a lot of places to go, right? There's a lot to do. There's a lot of different places, a lot of different possibilities of where you would want to spend your time and attention. And I think that's part of the challenge that we're seeing in our industry. When we step back and look at the business case, it's a worthwhile endeavor. Right? There's lots of cost. There's lots of funds that we're spending on an annual basis, regardless of the size of your company. You're spending $20 to several $100 million a year in quality-related costs. So we just picked a couple, and this is a study from my old colleagues at McKinsey. Medical devices focused, but from a general perspective, right, from a frame of reference perspective, relatively applicable to the biomanufacturing industry. So plenty of opportunities, worthwhile pursuing those opportunities. When we looked at the research, right, and starting from the framework that we're seeing limited progress, right, and when we talk to our clients and when we visit plants and look at the work being done, the general consensus is everyone wishes they could be moving faster. So what's holding us back? On the left-hand side, you see these three general themes that have come across. There are many others, long list of roadblocks, but the three main topics and messages come through in these three buckets, right? Attempting to boil the ocean, just trying to do too many things at once with our initial attempt. Costly solutions that don't deliver immediate value, right? We're all looking for that return on investment, having a tough time when we're making very large investments, getting very large returns very quickly. And then we're finding incompatible infrastructures as part of the challenge that many of us are facing. We ran a survey of our LinkedIn followers. We have about 1,000 followers, about 200 or so responded. Interesting findings. So about 35% of the respondents said that they had actually heard of Pharma 4.0 initiatives in their companies. And of that group, about 40% of them said that the initiatives that their companies are undertaking have some kind of focus and are paying attention in some way, shape, or form to the quality and compliance part of the business. So when you do math, about 20%, and when we looked at just a breakdown of the companies that responded, a little less than 20% of the companies are formally taking action on the quality compliance component of Pharma 4.0. That leaves 80% of the companies that are struggling to get started, right? And that's the objective of this conversation, again, is if you're in that 80% group, first, you're not alone. Second, hoping that you walk away from this presentation with some ideas of where you can start and where you can deliver some near-term results for your organization and begin your journey, right? As we all know, improvement journeys, hardest thing is to get started. So my goal is to help you get started. Looked at findings from the various large consulting companies on what success looks like and what are the characteristics of those that are being successful, not only in life sciences, but across all industries. And there are four major themes that came across. And again, basic concept here is you get started, and then you build from the early success, right? So when you look at those four keys to success, they all resonate in the basic operating structure where you're just getting started. And then you're making progress from that initial success. So first suggestion, right? First characteristics to success is to do something that impacts across multiple functions in a group, in an organization, right? So rather than focusing on a particular functional group, and here we're talking about the quality and compliance function in particular, so applications and solutions and early efforts that have an impact not only in the quality functional group, but in groups that are connected. Second key to success is focus on culture change. Right? Behaviors and mindsets drive performance, right? If you have the right culture in your organization, and you have the proper objectives that are properly communicated, you're going to get there. Focusing on collaboration, one of the most important components that we see in life sciences, particularly across functional groups, it revolves around this culture change dimension. KPIs, to make it meaningful. Make sure that there is a business case for the change that you're asking your organization to engage in. And the last one is make it a localized solution, right? Something that can be implemented in a small group initially, that can then be expanded from that initial success. Right? So with that general information and that general framework in mind, let's talk about where have we seen some companies start. Right? And I'm going to share some case studies based on some of the work that we did with helping our clients that we have then leveraged into solutions that could be deployed and have been deployed at other clients that are relatively straightforward to connect to your operating environments. So we're going to start with investigations. Right? Investigations is always an interesting topic. Everyone loves their investigations process. The starting point for this particular client, I think it's a common starting point that we see, particularly for organizations that are in trouble, right, or are working their way into that FDA regulatory environment type attention that we want to avoid. Broken process, right? Starting situation, broken process, timelines that were rarely met, a team that was always stressed, overworked, spending a lot of time trying to get things done, and a lot of them choosing to go elsewhere. Just no fun to work in this environment. As we looked at how can we help solve this problem, how can we help fix the problem, we looked at it from multiple dimensions, right? Not only the technical dimension of how do you get investigations done faster, more effectively, but how do we change people's lives? Right? How do we impact the way that they feel? How do we impact the way that they enjoy the work that they're doing? Took a structured approach, broke down the investigations process into 5 steps, and then you leveraged the data that was available to understand the variability that was occurring in each one of those process steps. We connected to the data systems, in this case TrackWise, applied predictive analytics to that data set, and got to developed understanding of what was driving variability, and developed a predictive model based on the understanding of that variability that enabled that organization to anticipate the issues that were going to create frustration for the group. Right? So think of an environment where you're identifying that this particular investigation, very early in the life of that investigation, is now likely to be delayed. And you get to understand that early in the life of the investigation. The management team can apply the resources and the prioritization necessary to change the trajectory of that investigation, where it now can be completed on time or as close to on time as possible, and more importantly, mitigate or eliminate the impact that delay was going to have in the product availability situation for that group. Right? Anxiety always comes typically to these processes when you've got a supply chain or a supply problem, right, that's brewing or it's now present, and an investigation is in the middle, right? It's part of the release process that needs to be resolved. Right? The other tool that we deployed was an automated alert and escalation system, which when we went back and looked at what had the most impact in this particular case study, it actually came back to being able to alert the management team and escalate that alert system through the organization to issues that were developing. So again, think about getting an early warning signal, having your supervisor hear very early on, we have something that's developing with this investigation that may require management attention. Talk to the lead investigator, or eventually the head of quality will get an escalated alert that enables the head of quality to ask the team, how can I help? To the cultural component and the culture change component of this particular project, which was very interesting with the client, is that we emphasize the conversations that we wanted to have with the teams, and the conversations were always about how do we help? How can I help? I'm the head of manufacturing, I'm the head of quality, I get the alert, so I know we have a problem. I also know that my team knows that we have the problem, and I also know that my team's already working on the problem. They need help, right? So my role is to come in and offer to help, engage in the problem-solving conversations, engage in the discussions on how do we help, how do we solve this particular problem, rather than coming in and pushing the team to work harder or faster. The escalation process enabled the productive conversation, how can I help? Here's an example of an escalation, alert and escalation progression for an investigation. Early on, the Helen supervisor gets the initial signal that there's an issue that may need her attention. Later on, it escalates to the head of manufacturing and the head of quality, and later on, it escalated to the formulation manager, whose help was actually required to finalize the CAPA on that particular investigation. By having those individuals involved early in the process, again, this investigation was closed much earlier than under normal circumstances it would have been closed. So we start with a broken process, broken system. After 6 months, we now have an operation that's closing investigations in a reasonable amount of time, still with opportunities for improvement, but significantly more organized, significantly better environment for people to work on, which had the effect of reducing not only overtime, but more importantly, reducing the turnover that facility was experiencing. When we stepped back and looked at what we learned from this particular project, which was to some extent interesting, but again, it led to this concept, right, in the conversation that if we leveraged the data that we have, the investigations process has the ability to become highly predictable. Right? There are a finite set of characteristics that your product, processes, and your people have that once they're understood, the ability to predict the outcomes of an investigation process is highly likely. So we were able to develop, again, highly predictive algorithms that allowed us to anticipate issues before they arose. The alert and escalation process was the other important discovery, that it was far more powerful than we had anticipated. Second case study, another client. This one has a warning letter. They're required to do a lot of retrospective and prospective document reviews. We're supporting that process. We supported that process. And one of the outcomes, or one of the requirements that they also had, was to develop a comprehensive remediation plan off of the comprehensive gap assessment. So the approach that we took was to look at all of their documents and leverage the outcomes of the reviews to identify the gaps in their quality management system execution process. So when we think about every one of those documents that are being generated, investigations, change controls, CAPAs, et cetera, they all have their own life cycles. But they also provide tremendous insight into how your quality system is operating and how your organization is performing as part of the process of getting those quality system documents drafted and approved. So as part of the review process, we organized the data collection of the outcomes of those reviews and collected that information to generate insights into the strengths and weaknesses of each one of the quality systems and each one of the quality system elements. So for example, the change control system on the bottom right-hand side, we identified a series of dimensions that are critical for the successful execution of the change control system, right? So just the fundamental SOP is the execution of your SOPs, right? We often find SOPs are good enough. The breakdowns in quality systems often come from the execution of those SOPs, right? So in this case, for example, we identified that the impact assessment and the effectiveness check of those documents that were going through the change control process needed significant attention, right? The very significant gaps in this particular client's change control system revolved around effectiveness checks and the impact assessments. So the remediation program that was defined focused on addressing those particular components of their change control system. So building on that QMS gap assessment infrastructure, where we're going next, and think about how can we leverage all that data that we're collecting or we can collect as part of your QMS element monitoring process. We're developing a mechanism to be able to collect that data in a structured way and leverage the outcomes of the reviews of each one of the documents, right? So think about an investigation goes through a review process. Your reviewer is typically annotating and capturing their perspective on that particular review. Most often, the outcomes of those reviews are not being leveraged, right? That information is not being collected in a structured way to be leverageable. The concept we're working on now is we're going to structure the data collection of the outcomes of those reviews. We're going to leverage that data to provide insights into the health of each one of the quality system elements, right? And as you see captured here, for each one of the elements, there's a series of dimensions that are applicable to that particular element that would now be monitored, right? To give us a sense of where things are working well and where things are not being executed as effectively as we would have liked in that particular quality system element. All right. So let me open it up for questions.
Thanks so much, Jaime. So questions? Here, we've got one here.
Ramadas Bhatt, Ionis Pharmaceuticals. In your example of case study, where you focus on investigation closure dates, I'm a little bit concerned about the method used, which is series of escalations to supervisors and management. Probably it would lead to rushing the investigation without getting to true root cause and probably blame it on human error and close it. So in my opinion, I think the focus should be more on the ability to get to the true root cause, identify and implement appropriate CAPAs, and then monitor CAPA effectiveness. So rather than focus on the closure date alone, that may have severe consequences.
So thank you for pointing that out. So that was the initial hypothesis that we had and that our client had, is that as we escalate, rather than improving the outcomes and improving the quality of that investigation, we're going to have the effect that you're describing. Interesting finding and interesting outcome was that once we coached the leaders, right, the supervisors and the managers, to offer help, right, rather than insisting that this particular investigation be completed in whatever time frame it was required, the whole conversation shifted from I need to rush this and I need to figure out how to close it so that I don't get yelled at, to how are we going to solve this properly? How are we going to get the right people involved so that the CAPA that we identify for this investigation is an appropriate and it's a strong CAPA that we're going to implement for this particular investigation. So I totally understand it and acknowledge the initial concern. The human behavior component of this can be handled in a way that would lead to the outcome you're describing. Absolutely. It can also be handled properly, where it becomes part of your support system, where your management team, again, is aware that there's an issue and offer to help and participate in the resolution of that issue.
Thank you. We might have time for one real fast question, if there is any others. Okay, then please join me in thanking Jaime today.